Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Got to tell you, going to start right off in the beginning. A little disappointed today. Woke up very excited about the potential of the January 6th hearing. Maybe maybe another bombshell, maybe a series of bombshells, maybe gonna put the little ribbon on the bow and all that stuff. Tie the yellow ribbon around the criminal referral package. Then I found out postponed. Little depressed about that. But here's the thing. The reality is, and again, the reason I'm depressed a little bit, we're about ready to launch this road tour. We're going to be on the road for the next month on our Working Class Heroes Road Tour, and not going to be doing the normal show that we do. We're focused on really just going into communities and talking to workers and focusing on working class issues. And we're not going to really be doing the daily show that we normally do. So this was kind of like one of the last things we were going to get into. And it was going to kind of be a nice transition. And now I'm going to have to miss this down the road. But I understand. Look, you got Hurricane Ian hammering Florida. It's a bad time. It's a bad time, especially since I want, and I know all Americans want, the voters in Florida and the people in Florida to be able to focus completely on protecting themselves and their families right now, so that once this passes, and it will pass, and we get all past this and clean up and do all that, they can then focus all of their attention right where it then belongs, and that is the criming of Donald Trump, and holding people accountable. So let's get past this. Let's move. Let's make sure that we help the folks who are going to be affected by this. And I know the White House is already making plans. Wheels are already in motion. Before the first drop hit the ground, they were prepping. That's what you want out of an administration. Unlike the last guy, who evidently now is, while Florida is being slammed, is begging for money. Because that's the right thing to do. Oh, please help us. Because with rain, sleet, snow, hurricane, the con does not stop. So the billionaire needs your money. Very bizarre. Anyway, today the president held what is the first White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health since 1969. Over 50 years ago, Richard Milhous Nixon held the first one back then. And out of it, we got some improvements in helping people. Back when government used to do that. Wow. In fact, as I was thinking about it, I remember as a kid, benefiting from some of the programs that came out of that '69 conference. Summer lunch programs, and I've talked about this often. It was one of those things that I remember. You lined up at the local public school in the summertime, and you got a little hot lunch of some sort. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for most of the kids in that line, it was the only hot meal they were going to get that day. And one of the first things Ronald Reagan did when he became president, Ronald Ketchup is a vegetable Reagan. One of the first things he did is he gutted that program. And, and for me, that cruelty is something that's always stuck with me. And it's something Republicans are famous for now. I go back to the George W. Bush years. In every budget that he proposed ripping out this very, very small budget line that would give seniors, fresh vegetables and groceries, and low income seniors the ability to eat, decent food. Somehow that had to go, but tax breaks for the wealthy and corporations, front and center. In fact, increasing must. But the president said today, you know what? We can do this. I know we can do this. We have to harness our greatest resources, our fellow Americans, we the people, you and me. Everyone, he said, has an important role to play. And I agree. Everyone does have a role in play of this because, I talk about this all the time. One of the great national disgraces is the fact that, honestly, is the fact that we have children who go to bed hungry. We have children who go to bed hungry at night in the wealthiest country in the history of civilization at its wealthiest moment. And that's a disgrace. Now, you had to trot out corporate America because corporations and some, charitable foundations and industry groups, they had to get their accolades. They've made, donations about $8 billion. And of course, we have to recognize them, Publix grocery store, and there's Novo Nordisk pharmaceutical company, Dione food company, they've donated some money. Meyer grocery store, they've offered a 10% discount for SNAP. There's corporate America is getting their praise. Thank you. Now, for me, no praise. We should be taxing you, and we should be taxing them at rates like we did back during the good socialist years of Dwight David Eisenhower, and feeding the children. But that's, in this moment, a bridge too far. And as I said, the start here, taxing the wealthy, that's where we start. And you go, but Rick, no, we can't. The wealthy, they're taxed enough already. Now I look at the reality. New CBO report out, and thanks to Bernie Sanders, who asked for this Congressional Budget Office report on wealth inequality for families. They looked at the period, a 30-year period from 1989 to 2019, that 30-year gap. And guess what they found? Yeah, they found that the rich got richer and the poor, you know the rest of this, right? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. The CBO actually put this into numbers. And what they found out is the poorest half of us, 150 million of us, the bottom 50%, those of us who work at the fast food places and the service sector and the retail jobs, those of us who get up every day, the working poor, and punch the clock and create the wealth for those at the very top to shuffle money from one pocket to the other, they saw their wealth actually decline. They hold only 2% of the nation's wealth. 150 million people, half of the people in this country, hold only about 2%. And now that's down from 1989, from when it was 4%. So they've actually lost ground. In fact, half. I mean, it's especially when you look at the fact that the top 1%, the folks in the rarefied air of America's penthouses, that top 1% holds 34% of all of the wealth in this country. And when they put out this graph, I mean, you could barely see the wealth of the bottom half. The next 40%, they've deadlined over the 30 years. They got a little bit wealthier, but not a lot. But wow, that top 10% and the top 1%, astronomical, just incredible. And as Bernie Sanders pointed out, the wealthiest 1% in this country got $29 trillion wealthier, while the average family saw barely anything. And when you look at the concentration of wealth held by the top 10%, that went from 64% back in 89 to 72%, driven mostly by, again, that 1% that holds now 34% of the wealth. The narrative goes simply like this. The wealthy are taking more of the pie, and the working class who bakes it and cooks it and serves it and cleans up after it, well, they're getting screwed. And we know this. We know it. So I want to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. When you look at this stuff, and it's right in front of us. We have a tax code that encourages greed, that encourages hoarding, that encourages hooray for me and the heck with you and your children and the rest of us. Something needs to be done. The fact that the top 10%, The average wealth of someone in the top 10% in 1989 was 2.5 million. It's now 6.4 million. While the bottom 25% had zero wealth in 1989, they're now in the negative 11,000 range. They actually fell that far backward. Amazing stuff. Let's quick go to the phones. We got Kurt on line one. Kurt, how are we doing today?
Oh, hold on a second. I'm sorry. Hey, I wanted to tell you that I did watch some of that White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health today
Okay.
that you were talking about.
Yep.
And I gotta say, I was listening to Secretary Vilsack and some of President Biden before I had to go back to work. But I actually emailed Secretary Vilsack after I saw him do his little speech, and I told him, this is kind of in the realm of President Kennedy's moonshot of the 1960s, trying to get a American to the moon and back safely by the end of the 1960s, or President Biden's cancer moonshot to end cancer as we know it. I mean, this sounds to me like a great national goal to try and end hunger by 2030. It's going to be a hard one, and like I quoted in my email to Secretary Vilsack today, to quote John Kennedy, we do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. And I said, we need to get you and, or how did I say? I said something to the effect of you and the rest of the Biden administration have to find a way to get every American involved in order for this to work. And that's how it's going to work.
Yep.
That's how it's going to have to work. And believe it or not, I did get a response back within 17 minutes.
Wow. And
yeah,
what'd they say?
He said, thanks. Well, Secretary Vilsack said, thanks for the note. Thanks for the note. And by the way, thanks for not rubbing in the Browns win over the Pittsburgh Steelers last week.
So you then know that someone actually read that and that was a bit personalized. It wasn't because my mind's going, well, that was an automated response. So they didn't automate the response, the Browns response there though.
No, because it was actually him, because I do have his personal email address.
Well, outstanding. So how do you think we get to this point? I mean, I've said, look, I have friends who say, we need to go the religious route. The churches need to do this, and this whole route. We need faith-based initiatives. And I go, we tried that. It hasn't worked. We've done a lot of that stuff. It hasn't worked. Where do you see us going?
It needs to be a public. I think it needs to be a public, meaning the government and private industry working together. That's how things used to work, where the government and private industry kind of partnered together and worked together to make this happen. Sometimes the old ways are good. Find a way for everybody, from the youngest person in the country. Think about it. Before you and I were even born, how did we get to the moon? How did we get to the moon? Do you know how?
No, go ahead. Tell me.
Okay. President Kennedy actually made it so that everybody had a stake in it. Kids, young school children, used to go to school and buy savings stamps to help fund the NASA research to help get to the moon by the end of the 60s. We need to find a way to get young people involved. When we were going to school, we had those Campbell soup label drives. We need to do something like that in order to help get money out there to help fund research in some way. But I just think we need to find a way to get every human being involved so they can have a sense of a national goal again. And what better way at this point than trying to get rid of hunger by 2030? It's going to be a tall order, no pun intended with the order thing, but it's going to take a lot of initiative, it's going to take a lot of involvement, and it's going to take a lot of convincing that everybody, kind of like ask not what your country can do for you, but you can do for your country kind of stuff.
Yeah, here's the thing, Kurt, and this is where my mind goes. It shouldn't be this difficult. It should not be that hard. Well, I don't know anyone. I know no one. No political stripe, no red hat, no blue hat. I know no one who isn't appalled by the fact that we have children who go to bed hungry. We have veterans who are homeless. It seems to me we just haven't had leadership to move us in the direction to do away with this. And I'm glad President Biden has taken this by the horns. This seems like a simple fix to me. The problem is money. And what we need to start doing is talking about taxing the people who have it, the very well-to-do who have done way too well for way too long. That's what we need to be doing. It seems simple to me. We need money. We need to put food on the table. We need to feed children.
Okay, the simple thing. Okay, then the simple thing would be, how about we do this? We go back to a 74% tax rate before Ronald Reagan.
Yes. Good start. I'm with you. Go.
We also make it so that big pharma and big oil will be forced to pay windfall taxes, and it goes into something like that. A portion of it goes into that, as well as research and development on other things. You know, but we still need to make it so that people feel like they're involved in
yes,
it too.
And this is
I don't know how.
This is where, Kurt, where I go to this point where you explain to people what we're going to do with that increase in tax money, that revenue that's coming in, and where it's going to go. It's going to go to feeding children. It's going to go to getting homes for veterans. It's going to go for ensuring that we get drug and alcohol treatment for people who need it, that we do the missions, that we do the work that needs to be done. I don't know anyone who's against that idea.
You mean like when Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House?
Yep. I remember
some of the money that was going to be raised for that was going to go into research and development for alternative sources of energy?
Yep. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And unfortunately Reagan poo-pooed it, and 45 years later, look where we're at. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, I'm probably overstepping it a little bit as far as what needs to be done, and it's probably simpler. But I don't know. There's got to be more to it than just that. But you're right. We need to start raising taxes on some of these higher wealthy people. And I would start with raising the tax rate, the top tax rate, not on everybody, the top tax rate on people making over a certain amount by up to 74%, like it was before 1981.
Yeah, it's not even a percent. It's not even an income, because these people aren't making incomes. These people are, and we need to change what is income. These are people who are accumulating massive amounts of wealth and assets. That's
capital gains and inheritance taxes.
Yep.
Or not inheritance, but inheritance and everything like that too.
Yeah.
That's where you need to go first. Like Joe Kennedy did to help pay for colleges. He just taxed pennies on the dollar from the time he was the Securities and Exchange Commissioner under FDR. He made it so that in order to help pay for public college for 30 years, up until I think after his son was president, maybe a little after that, he charged pennies on the dollar, taxed pennies on the dollar on capital gains, and that's what helped make it so that we could fund 80% of college tuition to public universities, colleges and universities, and you and I were only responsible for 20%.
Yep, that's what we need to go back to, a transaction tax, and you're absolutely right. But Kurt, I appreciate the time. Good stuff, man.
All right, thank you, and you have a good night. Hey, and by the way, good luck on your trip.
Thanks so much, Kurt. Appreciate it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you've got a thought, give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I go back to this, and the reality, we overthink this stuff too much. The reality is we're the wealthiest country in the history of civilization in its wealthiest moment. And when you have 10% of the population food insecure, that is a problem. And it's a problem we can solve. It's a problem we can solve with increased funding for food programs. It's a problem we can solve by taxing the very wealthy who are doing very well. Thank you very much. In fact, sorry to say too well. When the best thing that they can think about doing in their businesses is handing out more money to their buddies instead of reinvesting in business and creating new jobs and doing other things, more creative things, when all it is about lining their pockets, we got a problem. We got a problem. Let's go to Alice on line 2. Alice, how are we doing today?
We're doing okay. What I wanted to say was this. Yeah, we definitely need to end hunger, homelessness, and a lack of health care and education.
Yeah.
And we definitely need to raise the taxes on the wealthy and the corporations. And the problem is, though, that the majority, and I'm going to say majority, and I'm sure some of the listeners out there are going to go, what are you talking about? The majority of the Republican base is just totally uneducated in how everything works. And they're easily manipulated. So the Republican politicians are going, they're going to raise the taxes on everybody, and good jobs are going to go away, and the people start screaming. And what they don't realize is while they are being told by the Republicans that, everything's the Democrats' fault because they want to be communist, socialist, God knows what, people are losing their jobs and they're losing their livelihoods because of the greed of these wealthy and these corporations. So, again, the Republicans put all the emphasis on stupid stuff like critical race theory and what you can do with your kid and what you can't do with your kid. And let's worry about religion instead of worrying, and it's a way to deflect that base. So they're all worried about all that instead of worrying about actually what's going on because they don't understand what's going on.
Or the other side of it is they don't care. And that's the other part. This is where you look at the homeless problem that we've had for so long. You look at the hunger problem that we've had for so long. And, I hear my Christian friends saying, this is the job of the churches. Well, how come Christian folk ain't doing Christian stuff? I hear a lot of talk of prosperity gospel and all of that, but I'm not seeing a lot of that trickling down to those poor people.
Oh, I have to agree with you there because you have all those mega churches, and we're talking basically,
yep.
Your evangelical bunch that are these wealthy televangelists, and they're pulling in billions and billions, and they're certainly not following their Jesus's rules of take care of the poor and the widow and the hungry and all that.
Yep, they're taking care of themselves, and that's what they're doing. You're absolutely right, Alice. Got to take a quick break right here. Appreciate the thoughts. Thank you.
Bye.
No, and to highlight that giggling guy from down in Texas at Olstein, when there was that hurricane, that flood going through Houston, they didn't let anybody in that church. Nope. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1965. That was the day the Delano Grape strike began in California. The strike came a year after activists had forced Congress to end the Bracero contract labor program. The Filipino Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, led by Larry Idalong, Philip Vera Cruz, and others, called the strike against the Delano growers and the Coachella Valley grape growers. It had been a record harvest. Farm workers demanded higher wages, humane working conditions, and union recognition. When the growers refused, thousands walked out of the fields. A week later, the Mexican-American National Farm Workers Association, led by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, joined the strike. It was a historic moment. Within a year, the two unions would merge to form the United Farm Workers. The union sent strikers to the Oakland docks to persuade the longshoremen not to load non-union grapes. Many of the Filipino workers in the San Joaquin Valley worked in the Alaska fish canneries organized by the ILWU in the off-season. And so the ILWU honored their union brothers' request. Thousands of cases of grapes were left to rot on the docks. This initial victory led Chavez to organize a grape boycott against heavyweights DeGiorgio and Shenley Industries. 6 months into the strike, union leaders marched 300 miles from Delano to Sacramento to bring attention to their struggle. They hoped to pressure growers to the negotiating table and legislators to act on their behalf. For 5 years, the strike and boycott continued with marches, organizing, and picket line arrests. Gradually, the UFW began winning higher wages, union recognition, and hiring halls. Finally, in 1970, a collective bargaining agreement covering 10,000 workers was reached.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Let me say one word to you: nuts. Now, let me say one name to you: Ted Cruz. They've become synonymous with the Texas lawmaker perennially topping national lists of goofy right-wing political goobers. Only, Ted can't rightly be called a lawmaker, for he's not a serious participant in that process, instead devoting his senatorship to political stunts and picking silly PR fights with a growing list of enemies. Running out of people to attack, Ted has found another species for his vitriol: fictional icons. He's been padding his right-wing credentials by going after Mr. Potato Head, Mickey and Pluto, and, believe it or not, Muppets. This U.S. Senator has dedicated the power and public resources of his office to demonize popular creatures on Sesame Street, specifically Big Bird and lovable little Elmo. Ted rants he has proof that Muppets are covert tools of, quote, government propaganda. So this ridiculous excuse of a senator is saving America from Muppets. But for a whole bag of assorted nuttiness, you can't beat Senator Rick Scott's 11-point plan to rescue America. A disgraced former healthcare mogul, this mega millionaire reinvented himself as a wingnut Florida senator, and he now chairs a policy arm of the Republican Party. In February, he set forth a stunning agenda of far-out right-wing extremism that he says his party will push if they retake the Senate this November, including 1. Implementing new federal taxes on the poorest half of Americans. 2. Terminating Social Security and Medicare. 3. Completing Donald Trump's folly of a border wall. This is Jim Hightower saying, fiddle faddlers like Cruz and Scott have turned the once proud U.S. Senate into the little nut shop on the Hill.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as Hurricane Ian is slamming into Florida, I'm hearing a couple million people now already without power. Kind of makes you go, boy, I'm glad we got someone in the White House who's not vindictive and holding back aid just because. And I want to remind people that the senator from Florida, Marco Rubio, and the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, both voted against the aid for the victims of Hurricane Sandy when they had the chance to do that. So just kind of one of those things to think about. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on what's going on in Florida, I've asked Rick Wilson to come talk with us. He is a Florida resident and there now. He is also the co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Rick, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks for having me on. And I want to say I'm up in North Florida where it was pointed at us for a couple of days, but turned away. And our thoughts here in our family and with our team at the Lincoln Project are very much with the 1.6 or 1.9 million people right now who are without power, and we are praying hard for the folks in Orlando. It is still approaching Orlando. It is between a 2 and a 3 as of right now still, and it is beaming right towards Orlando, one of the biggest cities in the state. And Unfortunately, it's not done doing damage.
And it's horrible, and our thoughts are with the folks there as well. But I keep coming back to this moment where grateful that we've got a guy in the White House who is already planning for the response, is already got the wheels moving in the direction to help people and do the right thing, and not because it's political, but because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, as you and I were talking about just before we came on the air, no one's going to wake up in the morning and wonder, hey, is Joe Biden's response going to be to throw paper towels? Is it going to be to, well, as Trump did in California, make fun of them and say, oh, you should have raked your forests. Too bad about the fire sweeping your state. And look, Florida is a state that is very vulnerable to this kind of disaster. And governors of both parties over the years, at least of my political and observational career, have either risen or fallen by how they handle not just the technical parts of this, but how they relate to the victims of these storms, how they relate to people who are injured by these cataclysmic storms and these events. And this one is, I mean, look, it's as big as anything I've experienced in my lifetime since Andrew, and I was down there for Andrew. In 1991, I came down there. I was working for the federal government at the time, and came down for Andrew, and it was unbelievable. But this storm is going to do. Andrew punched Miami and then went into the Everglades. This is going to be a much worse scenario.
This is terrible. And look, this is not going to stop. We're going to have these time and time again, and response is important, but also figuring out how we deal with this and how we evacuate people. And I spent the day looking at Twitter and hearing people saying, well, everyone should leave and everyone should evacuate. And you go, yeah, not everyone has the resources to evacuate every time there's a scare. Not everyone has the ability to go. Some people have to hunker down, and this is where government has to step in.
Well, it is one of those moments where the vulnerabilities of many people in the state of Florida that play out, because we have such a large population of seniors, because we have such a large population of people who live in manufactured housing and trailers, because we have so many people who are dependent on they have to drive. There's no public transport here in Florida to speak of, and you can't move people at scale out of a place like Fort Myers or a place like Cape Coral. Those have very thin public infrastructure as that sort of stuff goes. And it's hard to organize it, and it's hard to motivate people to leave in the state of Florida because, this is a state full of very stubborn people. I'm a fifth-generation Floridian, and I can tell you there's a sort of point of pride with most Floridians, like, oh, I'm not going to go for a 1 or a 2. Well, this was a 4, maybe a 5, as it came ashore. And it is the damage we're going to see when the sun comes up tomorrow. I can't even imagine it yet, Rick. It is a heavy weight.
Now, you said this is something that's happened, multiple times over the years, and it's almost a sense of pride to live through it. Do you see things getting worse? Do you see, as someone, look, I just read the news. I have never been through a hurricane. I've never seen the devastation up close and personal until far after we were down for Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans in the aftermath to help clean up and stuff. But the power, the devastation of it happening. Are things getting worse? I mean, is climate change making things worse? Where do you put all this in the spectrum of where we are?
We had Cat 4s and 5s that have hit Florida before the point where the climate change problem is as evident as it is now, and maybe the frequency is changing. But Florida has always sort of been uniquely vulnerable, just given our geography, to this kind of thing. And I do think we're obviously going to have to plan for, and no matter where the climate trend line goes, we need to plan for the worst. And you can't have a state where, look, 50% of the population of Florida, here's a scary stat for you. 50% of the population of Florida lives within 5 miles of the water. 50% of the population of Florida lives within 5 miles
Wow.
of the water. And it's low slung. It's low. I mean, 2 days ago, it was supposed to hit Tampa. Now, my parents live in Tampa, and my sister lives in Tampa. And, you know, they were in the evacuation zone where a 9-foot storm surge like came ashore today in Southwest Florida. They would have been underwater, and they did not want to go. So half of this is sort of psychological. We've got to prepare people that a storm like this is not something you fool around with. And if there are going to be more of these 4s and 5s, then we've really got to shake people out of the idea that, you know, you can ride it out. I'm really concerned about Florida from a 30,000 foot sort of an economic perspective, because we are a state that for generations was considered very affordable, and people moved here. They came here from Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Massachusetts. They came here in droves because housing was cheap. Well, now we have a huge housing crisis in Florida. The prices have gone through the roof on everything, on both housing prices per se and on rents. And, you know, when we end up with a storm like this, we're probably going to lose thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of units, both of rental properties and of homes, of you know, mortgage homes. And, you know, I am concerned that the insurance market here, which has been, you know, in collapse for a long time, and, you know, it's going to completely go under and cost, you know, average Florida families vast increases in their property insurance rates. I mean, look, my property insurance has gone up about 3 times by a factor of like 3 in the last 5 years. I can't imagine what it's going to do for people who are in the really bad parts of the state for storms. And honestly, I mean, you know, fact, it matters to me. I don't like paying that much money, but I can more easily afford it than a lot of people. And I worry that we're going to end up with, you know, a whole class of citizens in the state who cannot afford to insure their homes or their, you know, or their property, and it's going to be catastrophic if this keeps happening.
No, and what you end up may having is people leaving the state in droves.
You will. That's what will eventually happen, Rick, is you'll end up getting folks who say, I thought it was paradise. I liked having, you know, I liked having, you know, 8 months of beautiful weather and, you know, 4 months that kind of not so great with humidity and storms. But if that 4-month window in the tropical storm season involves losing everything you own and can't insure it, that's probably going to drive people, you know, back out of Florida. And to be honest, this is something I'm going to bring a little politics into it right now. For the last 2 years, Ron DeSantis and the Republican legislature, they have been able to pass every bill under the sun to go after Don't Say Gay and Disney and critical race theory and, you know, all these other book banning, all this other crap. But they haven't done property insurance reform. And I don't know how Floridians are going to feel about this in a few months, because they're going to start getting those bills after the cleanup starts, and it is not going to be pretty. And it is something that I think it's frankly been irresponsible of them. I get it that that's the only political strategy they have,
right,
but it has been vastly harmful, I think, to the people of Florida. And I'm hopeful there will be a reckoning in that regard.
I hope so as well. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show with Rick Wilson. He's the co-founder of the Lincoln Project. You want to check out the work that they do, lincolnproject.us is their website. We'll get links out on social media. Now, you point out that they've gone after all these ideological bills to divide and, you know, and rip us apart. Whereas in these moments, you know, we know what's coming. We know these storms are going to continue to happen. We know they're going to continue to grow in magnitude. What have they done to try and mitigate some of the negative effects? What have they done to grow a transportation network to help people who can't get out? What have they done to help your state move forward and deal with actual crisis instead of the crisis they create?
Right. They have a catalog of imaginary demons in their head that they will fight against all day long. But when there's an actual crisis put before them, and look, it is not a surprise to anybody that hurricanes hit Florida. This is something that has been well established from the dawn of time. But they get a quicker political payoff. Nobody gets to go on Fox News because they did something good to fight against, to mitigate hurricane damage or improve the transportation system, or to train people on how to evacuate. And look, there are people in the Florida government right now, not in the political side, but in the emergency management side, who are breaking their tails and who are doing everything they can to help those people down there. And I'm not criticizing those folks at all, but the legislative process in this state is about rewarding major donors. It is about rewarding big developers. And there are very few incentives to improve the ability to be resilient in a situation like this.
And again, this is another example of a failed leadership, failing to address major needs, and the fact that you now have, I think you pointed out, 1.9 million people without power, again shows how antiquated our systems are, and how we haven't built resiliency into those systems to be able to withstand these storms.
Yeah, I mean, look, if this is the dumb Florida inside thing. If the state and federal government would work together to bury power lines, this problem would be solved very quickly. You would keep the lights on for millions and millions of homes. If you help people transition to solar and battery backups in their homes, it would make these kinds of crises not comfortable, but more sustainable. And again, it's stuff that people with means are going to survive this a lot better and a lot easier than the people who have been left behind in the state. And there are, frankly, a lot of people who have been very much left behind in the state.
No, but is that not the basic thesis statement for all of America? I mean, I started off with the CBO report today, saying that the very wealthy have gotten very wealthy, while the bottom half of the country have actually seen their wealth go down over these last 30 years.
This, as I mentioned earlier, the legislative process in Florida is so wildly corrupt. It is so insanely corrupt. People think, oh, Louisiana or New Jersey, they're the most no. Florida's legislative process is completely corrupt. It is a criminal enterprise to reward campaign donors to the Republican Party. Those people have done nothing. In fact, they have done things that have allowed developers to continue to expand into places where they shouldn't be building, into low-lying areas and sensitive wetlands and all these other things. And that entire process is a very rigged game.
Yeah.
Where we have plenty of money to fly asylum seekers to Martha's Vineyard, but we don't have money to provide emergency transport for people who are in the eye of a hurricane from nursing homes. And so I have a lot of emotions about this tonight. And look, you and I may differ on a lot of like philosophical things about economic stuff, but the fact of the matter is, when you've got a corrupt political system, as Florida does, at a profoundly corrupt level, that's not conservative. That's just criminal.
Yeah.
That's not free markets. It's a rigged system from the top down that is rewarding extraordinarily wealthy companies and individuals in this state, and it's doing it over and over and over again. And look, I know because I used to be part of it. Honest answer.
And that's why I'm glad you're out there fighting the fight and drawing attention to this stuff. And I hope my listeners in Pennsylvania are listening, because a guy running for governor wants the state of Pennsylvania to be the Florida of the Northeast. So if you want all the problems we're hearing about in Florida to come to Pennsylvania, the guy to vote for. But Rick, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the thoughts.
Hey, Rick, always a pleasure to be on with you, my friend. Have a great night, and hope your audience and folks listening tonight will keep those folks in Southwest and Central Florida in their thoughts and prayers.
Stay safe, brother. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, man.
Good stuff. Rick Wilson, co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK. 1-866-416-7425. Quick break. Right back after this. Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Would you be willing to stand up in solidarity with your fellow workers, even if it cost you your job? Well, on this day in labor history, the workers at Mersey Docks and Harbour Company in Liverpool, England, answered that question. The year was 1995. 329 Mersey dock workers refused to cross a picket line that was being walked against another company on the docks. The workers at Torside had been fired for protesting against erosions in job security and increasingly unpredictable scheduling. They were speaking out against the casualization of their labor. When the Mersey dock workers would not cross the Torside picket line, they too were fired. Dock workers across the world stood up in solidarity with the Mersey workers against this unjust treatment. They knew if it could happen in Liverpool, it might happen anywhere. Pickets sprung up from Norway to Japan, from Australia to Italy, and into the United States. It was a global outpouring of solidarity. The strike wore on for 850 days. 1 year into the strike, dock workers held an international day of action in support of the Liverpool workers. Finally, 2.5 years after they were fired, the dock workers agreed to a settlement. They did not get their jobs back, but they did get severance pay. A film was made about the struggle. The proceeds were used to purchase a bar in Liverpool. It is known as the Dockers Pub and has become a space for working class organizing. The International Dock Workers Council was also born from this strike. Today, the council has 90,000 members, a lasting movement of solidarity. 20 years after the strike, dock workers from across the world gathered in Liverpool to remember the struggle. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Let's go to the phones. Got Andrew on line 1. Andrew, how are we doing today?
Doing great. Rick, that interview was fabulous. That was so good, so informative. And boy, he was spot on with everything.
Rick's a good guy.
My second point is, while I'm in Detroit now, I grew up in Rhode Island, and I lived through Hurricane Bob and Hurricane Gloria, and those hurricanes were nothing like this monster hitting Florida now.
Yeah, our thoughts are with the people in South Florida. And look, you know, as I said at the beginning, I'm grateful we got somebody in the White House who's going to get the folks the resources that they need without which hat they're wearing or which allegiance they've sworn to. We're just going to help people, and I take solace in that.
But my point for calling was about the taxation points that people were bringing up earlier in the show. I truly believe we need to tax the very wealthy in this country, but be careful about the idea of taxing corporations, because won't they just put off their increased taxes onto the consumers? The other idea is, you know, we hear about constantly on these corporate news programs every night about the inflation is comparable to 41 years ago. No, tell us the truth. Tell us who was the president when the inflation was this high. Then tell us what the inflation was 40 years ago. Wasn't it like 17%?
Yeah.
And our inflation right now is like 8%. And the inflation back 40 years ago was our country did it to itself, where this is global inflation right now. We need the problem with the Democrats is messaging. They don't do it. And if they would join up with a group like the Lincoln Project, who does messaging perfectly, maybe we could get somewhere.
No. See, but the difference is the Lincoln Project are former Republicans. They understand the messaging. They understand that you don't do things in a million words that you can do in 5. So it is about being straight and forthright. But I want to talk about your tax idea for a second. Because you go back to the era that a lot of my MAGA hat wearing friends like to point to as the greatest era in American history, and that's the late 40s, 50s, 60s, that golden, that Norman Rockwell Leave It to Beaver era that I've been talking about for a while. We did that by having high taxes on the very wealthy, top marginal rate of 92% on rich people, a corporate tax rate at 56%. We were taxing corporations at a very high rate. We had strong government investment in things like infrastructure and healthcare and education, and also we had very strong unions. So for me, the corporate tax part of this incentivizes corporations to invest in their business instead of just loading their pockets. My problem with where we are right now, Andrew, is you look at all these stock buybacks. These are corporations telling us, yes, taxpayer, yes, Andrew, yes, Rick, you've given us all these tax breaks. In fact, you've given us so much, we don't know what to do with all this cash other than divvy it up amongst ourselves. We gave these tax breaks because they told us they were going to create jobs, they were going to reinvest in new plants and equipment and workers and all this stuff, and they haven't. And you go back to that golden era of the American working class, they were investing in their businesses. They were reinvesting in machinery and raises for workers and healthcare, and they were doing things, I think, in a better way. So for me, a higher corporate tax rate is going to make those people go, well, screw this. I'm not giving money to the government. I'm going to reinvest it in my business. So for me, it's a different incentive in my view. So that's where I come from.
What about the threat of windfall profit taxes on these corporations?
I'm in favor of it. I just don't think it's enough. I think if you have a high tax rate, I think it's universal across the board based on size of government of your company, like we had in the past. Small businesses got a lower load, big businesses paid a heavier load, and just like the wealthy paying 92% tax on that dollar over $1.6 million in today's wealth. They didn't pay that. They opted to do other things with their money. They gave money to school, to colleges, to put names on buildings, to hospitals. They did all kinds of things with it to help the community as opposed to just lining their pockets. So for me, it's about incentives. And a higher tax rate, I think, does change that calculus a little bit. At least that's my view on it.
And last, my idea on inflation is, this is worldwide, but we can control it somewhat in this country. We cause inflation. We the buying public. If we don't spend the money on these very high-priced items, it will force them to rethink what they're going to do.
And real quick, if I can add in this real quick, I think what the government needs to do, what Biden needs to do, is we need to start talking about antitrust. A lot of our inflation is due to the fact that in industry after industry, you have a handful of companies that control the industry and there's no competition. In the old days, you'd have, one player who wants to get a little bit more of the market share, lowering their prices or keeping their prices low to get that market access. You don't have that now. You've basically got a system that's all collusion because they're lining their pockets. But Andrew, I appreciate the call, man. Good stuff.
Spot on, Rick. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. Call back again anytime. Got to take a quick break right here. If you've missed any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Always there, always available. Share with your friends. You got a question, thought, comment, something on your mind, make sure you email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Anything you got on your mind. In fact, ugly stuff goes to the top.
Our adage is always hide from the wind and run from the water.
Hurricane Ian takes dead aim at Florida.
This is a historic storm for this province. There's no question about that.
Hurricane Fiona was the strongest storm on record to hit Canada. Plus,
fundamental human rights are being violated as we begin measuring climate change not in degrees of Celsius or tons of carbon, but in human lives.
Pacific Island nations call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty.
All of those hard luck stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
New York City has announced that students will no longer get snow days. Luckily, this isn't too big of a deal. I know it's sad. But you realize, thanks to climate change, New York's getting snow for, 2 years max now?
Sad but true. This is your Green News Report.
By 2026, this is basically going to be Florida with better bagels. That's all it's going to be.
Okay, Desi Doyen, I am really worried about the state of Florida today.
And for good reason. We'll get to Florida in a moment. But first, Hurricane Fiona slammed into Puerto Rico last week, and then near-record warm ocean waters gave it the juice it needed to spin all the way up to Canada, pummeling Nova Scotia and setting a new record as the strongest storm to make landfall in Canadian history. Fiona's storm surge washed entire buildings out to sea. Simultaneously, in the Philippines, Super Typhoon Noru shocked forecasters by spinning up from a tropical storm into a dangerous Category 5 cyclone in less than 24 hours, one of the fastest rapid intensification cycles ever recorded on the planet.
And that is saying something because we've seen a lot of these storms in recent years, starting from nothing and spinning up to fives in a matter of a day or two.
Yes, and they give very little time for residents to prepare before the storms strike.
Yep.
Typhoon Noru caused widespread damage and floods, knocking out power for millions in the Philippines and killing at least 5 first responders. And scientists do link the observed increase in rapid intensification to record warm ocean waters caused by man-made global warming. Here in the U.S., as we go to air, Florida residents are racing to prepare for Hurricane Ian, rapidly intensifying in the Caribbean Sea. The National Hurricane Center forecasts Ian will make landfall somewhere on Florida's west coast midweek. Evacuations are underway in some areas. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis has declared a state of emergency statewide. The exact location of Ian's landfall and storm surge will be key. Tampa Bay is particularly vulnerable to storm surge. Its shallow bay gives all that water nowhere to go. And the city hasn't seen a hurricane landfall in at least 100 years. Today, it is now heavily developed with many more people in harm's way. Tampa Bay Mayor Jane Castor on CNN warned,
Well, you certainly can replace personal possessions. You can't bring anyone back to life. Mother Nature always wins.
Yep, she does. Let's hope she takes a pass on Florida this time, but it is not looking good.
In other news, some great news for the fossil fuel industry and utilities. Ratepayers are set to pay much more for fossil energy this winter. Natural gas prices alone have more than doubled this year due to Russia's brutal ongoing invasion of Ukraine, which is causing a global supply crunch. But also, it's thanks to the fossil fuel industry's lobbying over many years to vastly increase exports of U.S.-produced natural gas, which means Americans are now forced to compete with the rest of the world for U.S.-produced supply.
Never mind Mother Nature, fossil fuel industry always wins.
U.S. fossil gas prices are now at the highest levels in well over a decade and are expected to remain high into 2023. Finally, at the annual United Nations General Assembly meeting still underway this week in New York City, world leader after world leader has used their time at the podium to sound the alarm about the climate crisis. But the president of the South Pacific island nation of Vanuatu went even further, calling for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to end production and use of fossil fuels, the first time any country has done so. The agreement would phase out the use of fossil fuels, accelerate safer and cheaper renewable energy, and make ecocide a crime punishable by the International Criminal Court. The president of Vanuatu noted that his country and other developing nations are least responsible for causing man-made climate change, but are getting hit first and worst by rising seas and extreme disasters.
We call for the development of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to phase down coal, oil and gas production and enable a global just transition for every worker, community, and nation.
Good luck with that. I mean it. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So a month ago, you had California Governor Gavin Newsom saying that he couldn't support AB 2183, the Agricultural Labor Relations Voting Choice Act. Nope, couldn't do it. And that act would make it easier for farm workers in California to vote in union elections, would help with collective bargaining, help them fight for better wages, hours, conditions. At that point a month ago, he couldn't do it, couldn't support it. And you had the United Farm Workers. They launched a 24-day, 335-mile march for the governor's signature to raise awareness, to pressure Newsom to sign the bill. Well, you know what happened. Today he signed it. That's what pressure does. That's what organizing does. That's what getting people out into the street does. Uniting working people, forcing elected leaders to act in, well, not just our behalf, but theirs. It works. And not too long ago, we talked about this. Governor Newsom signed the Fast Recovery Act. That will reform the fast food industry in that state and put a floor under all fast food workers' feet. Did I say feet? They'll put it under their feet and make their lives better, and kind of changing the way we do labor law in this country. And that's why I thought it was an interesting moment when I saw the article written by my good friend Rand Wilson and Peter Olney, Sectorial Bargaining, Labor's Pathway to Power. This article, very important. We're going to get links out on social media, how people can take a look at it. Guys, I appreciate you taking time for me. Rand, Peter, thanks for being here.
Great to see you again, as always.
So, I'm looking at California as really the leader in moving us in the direction of giving workers rights. Because a month ago, he wasn't going to sign that farm bill. Now he signed it. He signed the Fast Food Recovery Act. That's going to do some great things. It seems that we're kind of rejiggering labor law in this country a little bit.
Well, let me clarify something here. It's important to give some credit to a Pennsylvania native named Joe Biden, who publicly pressured Newsom to sign that agricultural act. And Newsom is fuming because of it. He got shamed into it by our president, Joe Biden, from your great state of Pennsylvania.
No, you're absolutely right. And I did not say that, and I should have. Because here's the thing, and this is where I keep saying to people, whether it's this thing or it's the railroad workers, if we don't have Joe Biden in the White House, none of that stuff happens. If the Orange Menace is there, we don't get any of this stuff.
You're right on that, man.
So, Rand, let me ask you, because, we're in this moment, and I know you've been a longtime union organizer. You're somebody who's been on fighting a lot of campaigns. We're seeing a lot of organizing, a lot of strike activity. But we're also seeing that the laws are kind of stacked against workers. Is this what other countries do, kind of a forward way for us? Is this the path that you think is the way we're going to go?
Well, first of all, the law is stacked against us, and that's almost always been the case. But we are in that Joe Biden moment where we are getting favorable decisions because of his appointments to the National Labor Relations Board. So there's a real window for organizing right now for workers. There's a pathway to get to collective bargaining that we haven't seen in a long time. And there's also an uptick on the part of young people in particular in their interest in unions. And I'm sure that you've discussed this on past shows. But there's something fundamentally wrong when the company that you organize as a worker is put at an economic disadvantage because you've been successful at winning a good contract with fair wages and decent benefits, and yet all the competition that might still be not union is competing with lower wages and less benefit costs. And so that's why we wrote this article, because we think we need to find a pathway in this country to move towards what we call sectoral bargaining. And if absent that, there's really no long-term labor strategy that I can perceive that's going to be successful. No. So that's the point of our paper, the article that you mentioned, and that's what Peter and I have been working on, is trying to find a path towards collective bargaining where it encompasses an entire industry sector, right, not just one particular enterprise within that sector.
Now, I was fortunate enough to spend most of my working life, well, all of my working life, in the freight industry, in the LTL freight industry under the National Master Freight Agreement, which, back in 1964, they began doing this. They tried to bring all of the trucking companies, the less than truckload companies, the LTL companies, under one contract, so that everyone had the same wages, the same benefits, the same conditions. Everyone had the same agreement, and that companies then had to compete on whatever, service, on who's the most efficient, on the right competition things, Peter. And this seems to me to be, an old idea that we're now making new again, and maybe taking from other countries and doing what they do well. So this is kind of an interesting moment.
Yeah, we can go to other countries, but we can go right here to the West Coast with the sectoral agreement that my union, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, has with the giant ocean carriers and stevedoring companies in the 29 ports of the West Coast. In each of those ports, the wages and conditions are identical. All these companies have to compete on delivery time, quality of service, rather than cutting wages of working longshoremen. So we have sectoral agreements. The auto industry was a sectoral agreement. Unfortunately, there's 1 million auto workers in this country, and only 300,000 are under contract to the UAW. There are massive sections of the industry now that exist, particularly in the Southeast, that are non-union. So if we're going to get back to sectoral bargaining in the auto industry, we've got a lot of organizing we got to do.
So let me ask you guys this, because I look to France as a country that does this, in huge amounts, where it was something like 98% of the people are covered by contracts and contract language. But only a handful of a percentage, 5, 6, 7%, are actually members of unions. How do unions then exist if it's not a member-driven kind of thing, that you're just talking about raising standards for people who aren't paying dues? How does that work in an American model?
Well, the European model historically was driven by, as you know, a high degree of class struggle. In fact, liberation struggles in some cases, in the case of that I'm most familiar with, which is Italy. And it is true that they represent 85% of the workforce under collective agreements, but only 25% of those folks actually belong to the unions. And we can talk about the nature of that system, but they do have sectoral bargaining. They do take wages and conditions out of the competitive mix. And the living standards of Italians across the board are much better than here. They have national health insurance. Waiters, you see waiters our age, Rick, in restaurants working, making a good living because they are covered by a national sectoral agreement. This is a great system, but it only can come to this country with a combination of a ground game, a fierce struggle, coupled with political reality.
Right.
And that's what's always brought us sectoral bargaining in this country. It's not strictly a question of worker initiative, although that's the main driving force, but we have to have favorable political conditions. And you just pointed to, some of the factors in our favor right now in this Joe Biden moment.
No, and also all the young people who are organizing in record numbers, at least in my lifetime. Rand, I wanted to ask you, though, because you brought up the auto industry a moment ago. I remember Peter did, with the number of people who are auto workers, but only a small percentage are union members. You look at these right to work laws that are coming around, and 26, 28 states now. Would this make all of that moot at this point, where now you're talking about just raising standards across the board and not focusing as much on membership? Where do you see this going?
Well, let's hope that the right to work for less doesn't spread any further. But I think that's a reflection of political weakness, and also the weakness in labor's inability to organize, primarily in the South. And what Peter is saying, and what we wrote in the article is, a lot of academics are kind of seizing on this idea of sectoral bargaining, but they're not emphasizing the necessity to do the organizing and to build the class struggle on the ground, militant activity to drive towards the goal line of taking wages out of competition and having industry-wide agreements. And I think that, if a state is a right-to-work state, that's not going to change because we get sectoral bargaining. But I think we can transform people's perception of labor when we find pathways to sectoral bargaining that combine militant worker activity and political opportunity.
Yeah, the reason I ask that is because you can't have areas that are going to race you to the bottom while you're trying to raise standard up. It's kind of a situation that you're eventually going to everybody be pulled down. So that's the reason I asked. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Peter Olney, former retired organizing director for the ILWU, and Rand Wilson, a union organizer. They've got a new piece out that I think is really important. You need to take a look at Sectoral Bargaining, Labor's Pathway to Power. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. Now I'm looking at next year. My Teamster union is engaging right now in negotiations with UPS, and I look at the package delivery system as that place where if the Teamsters are going to save good, solidly middle-class jobs that you have at UPS, they're going to have to figure out a way to raise the floor for the people that are being exploited at Amazon, the FedExes of the world who have been being exploited for years, and all of these other kind of startup, whatever, that are going on. I think you have to be able to raise all of that while still raising the standard of living for UPS workers. Is this kind of the world that you're envisioning, this kind of a situation where all of that would come together?
Well, that UPS contract is the largest private sector agreement in the country, covering roughly 350,000 UPS employees. And as you said, the package and delivery industry is evolving. We have just-in-time gig economy companies coming in that are happy to pick up, deploy a worker who they don't consider to be an employee, but using an app to go get a package from a warehouse and is personally delivered in their own car. UPS bought a company like that. So the threats to the wages and working conditions for people in the industry are real. The much bigger threat, of course, is what you mentioned. Amazon, which is getting away with very low pay and abusive conditions, and is a perfect example of a company that's only creating the sort of low road throwaway jobs, subcontracting work that's bringing standards down. The opportunity next year with the Teamsters national bargaining is for those negotiations to mobilize not just UPS Teamsters, but for the entire labor movement to grasp what an opportunity this is to demonstrate in a visceral way the power of unionism and collective bargaining, and to use that contract as a teachable moment for the labor the package and delivery industry, for Amazon workers, but for the entire United States. And hopefully the political situation aligns with the bargaining situation, and we're going to come out of this with a terrific agreement for Teamster members at UPS, and with an inspiring story of how working class unity can win better wages and working conditions.
Yeah, no, again, I go back to my experience as a freight driver under the master freight agreement. And it didn't matter who I worked for. It didn't matter if you worked for Yellow or Roadway or ABF or for Cornflake when they were in business or Preston or any of those companies. The benefits were the same. The pay was the same. Working conditions were all the same. So you could move from company to company, and you had portability of benefits. So I'm looking at this as possibly the answer, not just for the past, but also the future, because you brought up the gig economy, Rand. So Peter, I wanted to ask you, because there's so many people now. I think the statistic is 42% of the workforce is somehow engaged in gig economy work. Is this a way to address that gig economy that we're putting a floor underneath people's feet, kind of like we have in the building trades?
Well, the gig economy is, I think, much ballyhooed and highly overrated. I mean, we had a situation here in California where we applied a three-step test to who qualifies as a contractor and who is an employee, called the ABC test, that came out of a state Supreme Court decision with a Dynamex corporation. And we enshrined that and codified that into state law, which would have clamped down on companies like Lyft and Uber, who are really employing these people, but using the scam of independent contracting or gig work as a way to avoid their responsibilities under the law. Minimum wages, benefits, unemployment insurance, all the things that regulated employers have to deal with. They spent $300 million on Question 22, which was a statewide referendum to overthrow state law. Their referendum has been challenged in court, and the court has stayed the implementation of their referendum. But so that's an example of the gig economy running wild, running amok. We need to regulate those companies, and we need to force them to use an employment model. They can do that. You can have flexibility of employment with good wages and benefits. They are not in contradiction with each other. In fact, you want to talk about flexible employment, the ultimate flexible job is a longshoreman who comes to the hiring hall and works when he wants to, puts his peg in the board and says, I'm ready to go to work. And then he can go away for 6 months to the Bahamas and come back and work again when he decides he wants to flex. So this concept of, flexibility is in contradiction with, employment and wage and hour laws is complete horseshit.
Whoops.
Yeah. Oops. But this is, the reason I brought this up is, because a lot of people who are engaged in this gig economy think that they have what you're talking about.
Yeah, they do. And we got a lot of work to do in organizing those folks. I'm not suggesting that you can mandate this from on high. You're going to have to build organization. And here in California, we have a wonderful organization called Rideshare Drivers United. In fact, a woman that we cite in our article, who's a law professor here in San Francisco, engaged in a wonderful discussion with the past president of the Communication Workers of America, Larry Cohen, on just this topic of the gig economy and how to regulate this gig economy and how to bring sectoral bargaining to this gig economy. We want real sectoral bargaining, not a phony deal that gives unions thousands of members, but no rights to the workers and no agency to the workers. That's one of the dangers in the sectoral bargaining sexy moment, is that you can have sectoral deals that are not good deals for workers.
So how do we get, let me ask you, Rand, first, and then to you, Peter, the last question I've got. How do we get to this place? I mean, there are a lot of ideas floating around. How do we get to the place where you're talking about?
Well, I'm going to flip it to Peter, because that law that was just passed in California for fast food workers, I think is got a lot of course, the devil's in the details, and, perhaps it opens the door for some skullduggery, but it looks to me like SEIU and other unions in California muscled political pressure and mobilized workers in the fast food industry to at least create a pathway towards sectoral bargaining. But Peter knows a lot more about it than I do, so I'm going to flip it to him.
So we just had the passage of AB 257, which creates a fast food council on a state level, which would be a tripartite body, government, business, and labor, developing minimum standards for the fast food industry. And there's plenty of historical precedent for that. Back in the 30s and the early 40s, there were hundreds of these kind of wage board settlements. Professor Kate Andreas, who we cite in our article at the Michigan Law School, has written extensively about this. But these were tripartite bodies that established standards. And in fact, the Longshore Agreement that we're still working under was sanctified and ratified by a federal wage board after the strike ended on the waterfront in 1934. So this is a really positive development in California. Let's see what comes out of it. We're hoping that it's going to be something solid for these workers and giving them some kind of agency and organization. So,
right, because it's
watching.
Because it's actually putting workers on the board and worker representatives on the board, because this is something that other countries do. They actually have people who sit on the board of directors of these companies and have a voice in how the companies are being run. So you're talking more integrated, decision making, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, the danger is, again, I spoke to this before. The danger is that somebody's going to look for fast membership gains and sign a phony deal. And we're hoping that's not going to happen in California. And we believe that this is a good faith effort by the service employees to really empower these fast food workers.
Outside of what's going on in California, do we see anywhere else where this is happening? Because when we were talking to people in California about the Fast Recovery Act, they really believed that this was going to sweep across the country, and this is going to be the new direction for labor. I'm not quite so sure. Rand, where do you come down?
Well, I definitely I'm going to applaud any effort to try and raise standards for workers, and for particularly the lowest paid and most fragmented and disorganized workforces in the country. We have to be innovative, and we've got to be embracing new ideas. I know that in New York City, a similar initiative there has created a wage board and a tripartite panel. The employers are challenging it, but it's a very similar model to what was passed statewide in California. It's just for the city of New York. And it includes, by the way, Starbucks, because that's a fast food, in the New York law, that's a fast food store, and I believe it's true in California as well. Starbucks would be included in the California law. So this could be a moment where we have an uprising in Starbucks, genuine worker organization, coupled with a bargaining strategy that could lead to significant improvements. So I'm optimistic and excited about it. This is a moment for labor that I haven't seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, we've got excellent opportunities ahead. But guys, I appreciate you taking time for me. Great article. Peter Olney, retired organizing director at the ILWU. Rand Wilson, organizer. Appreciate the time, guys. Thanks so much. I hope you come back and talk to me again real soon.
You bet.
Thank you, Rick. Great show, Rick. Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys. Again, if you want to take a look at the article, we'll get links out on social media. It's Sectorial Bargaining, Labor's Pathway to Power over at newlaborforum.cuny.edu. We'll get links out on social media. Easy to find. We'll get it to you. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Would you be willing to stand up in solidarity with your fellow workers, even if it cost you your job? Well, on this day in labor history, the workers at Mersey Docks and Harbour Company in Liverpool, England, answered that question. The year was 1995. 329 Mersey dock workers refused to cross a picket line that was being walked against another company on the docks. The workers at Torside had been fired for protesting against erosions in job security and increasingly unpredictable scheduling. They were speaking out against the casualization of their labor. When the Mersey dock workers would not cross the Torside picket line, they too were fired. Dock workers across the world stood up in solidarity with the Mersey workers against this unjust treatment. They knew if it could happen in Liverpool, it might happen anywhere. Pickets sprung up from Norway to Japan, from Australia to Italy, and into the United States. It was a global outpouring of solidarity. The strike wore on for 850 days. 1 year into the strike, dock workers held an international day of action in support of the Liverpool workers. Finally, 2.5 years after they were fired, the dock workers agreed to a settlement. They did not get their jobs back, but they did get severance pay. A film was made about the struggle. The proceeds were used to purchase a bar in Liverpool. It is known as the Dockers Pub and has become a space for working class organizing. The International Dock Workers Council was also born from this strike. Today, the council has 90,000 members, a lasting movement of solidarity. 20 years after the strike, dock workers from across the world gathered in Liverpool to remember the struggle. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Let me say one word to you, nuts. Now, let me say one name to you, Ted Cruz. They've become synonymous with the Texas lawmaker perennially topping national lists of goofy right-wing political goobers. Only, Ted can't rightly be called a lawmaker, for he's not a serious participant in that process, instead devoting his senatorship to political stunts and picking silly PR fights with a growing list of enemies. Running out of people to attack, Ted has found another species for his vitriol, fictional icons. He's been padding his right-wing credentials by going after Mr. Potato Head, Mickey, and Pluto, and, believe it or not, Muppets. This U.S. Senator has dedicated the power and public resources of his office to demonize popular creatures on Sesame Street, specifically Big Bird and lovable little Elmo. Ted rants he has proof that Muppets are covert tools of, quote, government propaganda. So this ridiculous excuse of a senator is saving America from Muppets. But for a whole bag of assorted nuttiness, you can't beat Senator Rick Scott's 11-point plan to rescue America. A disgraced former healthcare mogul, this mega-millionaire reinvented himself as a wingnut Florida senator, and he now chairs a policy arm of the Republican Party. In February, he set forth a stunning agenda of far-out right-wing extremism that he says his party will push if they retake the Senate this November, including 1. Implementing new federal taxes on the poorest half of Americans. 2. Terminating Social Security and Medicare. 3. Completing Donald Trump's folly of a border wall. This is Jim Hightower saying, fiddle-faddlers like Cruz and Scott have turned the once proud U.S. Senate into the little nut shop on the Hill.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I gotta tell you, I'm finding Maggie Haberman annoying, but evidently she's got a new book out. Turns out, according to Maggie Haberman of the New York Times, that Donald Trump was one tweet away from firing Ivanka and Jared from the White House. Just one tweet. And it was evidently John Kelly who said, no, maybe you should talk to them directly. And the firing never happened. I wish you'd have sent the tweet. probably would have saved Ivanka from maybe going to jail down the road. Who knows? Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day, our good friend Bob Ney, former Ohio Congressman, political analyst. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thank you, Rick.
So what do you think of this? One tweet away from firing the daughter and the son-in-law.
Well, I think the story is true, first of all.
Of course it is, because chaos was the order of the day in that period.
And I also think that Ivanka and Jared probably knew at any point in time in their lives there's a tweet in the bank sitting there. I mean, look, Donald spares no one. No one. When he is angry, he is angry. That's it.
Yeah, see, I thought Ivanka would of all of the kids, of all of the people, I thought she was the special one. This is a weird moment. I mean, because I thought she was beyond reproach. So there's still part of me that goes, maybe she gets thrown under the bus at some point too.
No one is above Donald Trump.
All right.
No one. He's the top. Now, she's second,
yeah,
but he's the top. So you don't offend the top. And I think they knew, like I said, there's always a tweet in the bank. Hey, I'm going to use that tweet. Now, if he did do it, though, he has these weird ways when he fires people of then bringing them back, but they're not officially back, but they're still back in the fold. So she would have still been around, but just maybe a different title or something.
Yeah, of course, because
I think it's hilarious though. He's going to fire his daughter by tweet. Seriously, think about it.
No, I mean, does that not speak volumes for his character? I mean, really?
Right. I mean, Twitter really should, frankly, have kept him around because he was kind of good for their name in the sense of the use of Twitter.
Again, we had this conversation. I was against them throwing him off. Because again, Twitter needed him,
Sure.
just like I was against throwing Marjorie Taylor Greene off of her committees. I think you need to keep these people there. I think you need to keep crazy front and center so you can keep an eye on them.
Right.
Speaking of keeping an eye on them, one of your former colleagues, Corey Lewandowski, is back in the news. Evidently cut a deal on some sex charges.
Now, I have not read that story yet. What was the deal that was cut?
Evidently, the way that I understand it, he got drunk.
Now, this
and
was with the contributor.
Yeah, made some advances to a woman at a charitable dinner back in September 21. It doesn't really say what. I'm sure it was a little handsy, a little this, that. But he's agreed to, I guess it was a misdemeanor charge of battery.
Right.
He's going to get, I think, 50 hours of community service, an 8-hour impulse control counseling session, and he's just got to stay out of trouble for a year and pay a $1,000 fine.
Right.
This
is another example, though, because that whole incident happened. The Trump organization fired him, quote, banned him from Mar-a-Lago, but then really didn't.
Of course.
Really didn't. Now, I have not read this article yet, but I just briefly had skimmed over. I didn't know the details, but yeah, they reduced it to a misdemeanor battery, and she's the lady is a huge Trump supporter, right? A money raiser.
Yeah, big money raiser. It's one of those things where I don't know what you're thinking there, Corey. You read those signals wrong.
Right. Yeah, because I think she directly called the Trump organization and said he had to go at that time.
Yeah. Also on the Trump front, since we're talking Trump, evidently he wanted to bomb Mexico, bomb some drug labs. Evidently. And I go, I don't doubt that he wanted to bomb a lot of things, hurricanes, for instance.
Right. Yeah, he had repeatedly actually asked to bomb the Mexican drug labs, and that was in the new book that he had wanted to do that.
I don't know how I feel about that, to be honest with you.
Well, he wanted to have the drug labs in Mexico bombed, and one of the top officials he had in the health organization, I don't know which one, they didn't name it, but suggested that they be controlled by putting them as a target and to stop the flow of drugs. I think it's an interesting idea. I don't think that this idea is going to be where people go, oh, he wanted to bomb them, because they're drug lords. Then it's going to have some little form of sympathy, I would guess.
Yeah, I'm not actually opposed to to
Right.
taking out drug lords.
Right.
I don't know. There was it should raise to the level of the president, calling out the military and doing surgical strikes. But I guess it's better than mean tweets. I don't know. But I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Well, they had that, and then there was another story in this whole article with this book, which I want to get the book, but they tell a story about he pretended he was a reporter and called Congresswoman Debbie Tingle. Did you read that?
I did.
I'm like, that's so weird. Can you imagine this conversation there?
Hello, I'm a
I want
reporter.
to talk some great things with you, Deb. How are you? Is it great? I'm a great reporter. You know that. I'm thinking, what is this about? I couldn't help that one. I had
That's
to
brilliant,
try.
Bob. I think that is the first time I've ever heard you do the Trump.
I'm working on it. I'm going to have it down. I'm telling you.
That was we got to keep that. That's a keeper. We got to keep that. We're going to keep that because that was fabulous.
Okay.
Those were the best words, Bob. The best
All right.
words. Show over. That. I can't
that's how
top
the
that.
conversation would have went. It should have went. Oh, I know who you are.
Are you Donald Trump? Because here's the thing. This is not, you go. Somebody would go, no, he wouldn't do such a thing. But yeah, he's got a history of doing this.
Right, exactly. And then you think about it. I mean, this is Weird Town. I mean, these are things that, like I said, if you and I were going to write, HBO says, hey, Rick and Bob, develop some scripts, and we came up with this stuff, they would kick us out of the office saying, are you two idiots?
Yeah.
Nobody would do this.
Yeah, this isn't National Lampoon.
Right. I mean, it's sort of like SNL all the time, Saturday Night Live with these stories. It's hilarious.
So
it's surreal.
So the question, was his reporter named John Barron?
I don't know.
No, because if you remember, John Barron was the name he used to use when he was his own secretary.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. I
Yeah,
forgot that was one of his pseudonyms, John Barron.
Yeah, John Barron calling for Donald Trump. Here I am, Donald Trump. Yeah, very, very bizarre. Very strange. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Bob Ney, former Ohio congressman, political analyst, sharing our best Donald Trump impressions. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Got to get your thoughts on on what I think is an incredible call to action today by President Biden on the front of ending childhood hunger and doing it rather quickly by 2030. This close to an election. I think this is. And I don't think this is an election stunt. I think this is, truly something Biden wants to work on and wants to conquer. I think this is a good thing.
Right. He's got a plan to end hunger in the U.S. by 2030. Now, people tend in politics for some reason to make fun of these plans, not just Biden, but historically, other people who have tried to, do some what I call impact legislation and impact process. But, he's taking aim at what they call food hunger, food insecurity. And they had a conference, and they're trying to, make this the goal. And this is something that could be done. Now, is it going to be easy? No, but it is something that absolutely could be done. And by the way, this is the first White House conference on hunger since Nixon.
Yep.
Now, that's something.
Since 1969. And the thing is, as I said at the beginning, as a kid growing up in the projects, I actually benefited from a lot of those programs that Nixon, LBJ and then the Nixon administration put into place. Like the school lunch programs. And I remember as a young kid, going to Purtis Elementary School in the summertime and lining up with the other kids to get, a hot lunch. And for most of the kids in that line, it was the only hot lunch they got. And I also remember Ronald Reagan destroying that program. So for me to hear Biden say we're going to start talking about doing that again and making sure that every kid that goes to school gets lunch or breakfast, that to me is important, and I think it's something that should unite us and call to our better angels and put down our red hat and our blue hat and our flags and our let's go this or that and say let's accomplish something.
And he's managed to get some bipartisan support on this, and he also has a public-private partnership. So he's also, calling in the private world to do something, and then there would be $8 billion in new commitments, and then the $2.5 billion would go towards startup companies focused on the solutions to the hunger and the food insecurity. Then $4 billion would go to philanthropy aimed at improving access to nutritious food, and this can be done. I mean, our friend Alan Ratner had goats for the old goat in the Sudan, where you paid $60. I did it every birthday Ellen had. You paid $60. They had a goat delivered in the Sudan, provided milk, and it literally, Ellen Ratner, one person, literally made a difference. So those types of ideas, the Ellen Ratners of the world, can be incorporated through our president's plan.
Yeah, in fact, we bought a couple of them as well. Did the same thing and they would send you a picture of one of the folks in the community holding your name on a sign with the goat there, smiling, saying, "Hey, thank you for providing us with this goat that's going to feed people." It's a great program, and we should be doing more of it. But here again, I hear my Christian folk friends say, "No, this should be the religious people doing this stuff." And I got to tell you, Bob, I'm really uncomfortable with the religious folks taking this over because they haven't really done the job to this point. I think this has got to be something that isn't based on religion. This is just based on we got to get it done, and it doesn't seem difficult to me. You spend the money, you feed people.
Right. I mean, this was put together. You had Congressman McGovern, Senator Booker. You had the late Jackie Walorski, and then I think it wasn't Mike Braun from Indiana in on it. And they all got together, and now this will grow. The president will get support on this, I predict. But again, it's 50 years after the first conference of this type. 50 years. So I think by now a lot of people realize you want kids to perform and function. They have to have breakfast. And then some people say, "Well, let them eat at home." Well, you know what? Some kids don't, and that's the way it is. And you have to provide other ways to help them. But I think these ideas can go worldwide too. Hunger is something that we can stamp out.
Absolutely.
It is.
I mean, when I looked at the numbers, it said 10% of the country is food insecure, or what we used to call when we were younger, hungry. 10%, that's it. I mean, it doesn't seem like it should be that big of a lift in the wealthiest country in the history of civilization at its wealthiest moment.
Right.
I mean, it just seems like it's within reach. I mean, the fact 10% seems very doable.
Right. Exactly. And so I think it will get a lot of support. I think it'll be something that people there'll be very little criticism of it. Because, look, people used to scream about Head Start and school lunches, etc., and I think a lot of people now recognize the fact that it really has helped a lot of kids.
Yeah. But today, all I saw from the conservative news was evidently Biden had a gaffe.
Yeah, I didn't even mention that because he was, thinking about the late Congresswoman. She was killed in a crash. He was going to be meeting with her family, and, had she been alive, he would have called her up, and so he said her name, and then, of course, everybody put it into the realm of something's wrong with him, but it was a gaffe.
But for me, anybody who brought that up and made that an attack point, they're the enemies of this program.
Right. Yeah, they made that the story.
No, I mean that's the reality.
I think the substance of what he's going to do is going to prevail.
Especially when you look at the fact that Sanders today came out with his statement on the CBO report that he asked for, that shows that inequality in this country getting enormously worse, and that the top 1% of this country now controls 34% of the wealth of this nation. The top 10% of people in this country control 72% of the wealth of this country, and yet the bottom half, the bottom 50% of us, you and me, just 2%.
I think that the Democratic side when they put the Republican side into a box in the sense of appealing to the average person, let's say Republican, who's making, $80,000 a year, and then you say, compare yourself and your taxes you paid the last decade to Bezos.
Yep.
Compare yourself. Now, who's going to sit there and say, "Oh, I'm really happy that he didn't have to pay anything. I'm really happy. I'm glad I had to pay and he didn't." It's not going to run that way. This theme is a reality that has grown, and there is no excuse for the uber wealthy to not pay when we do. No excuse.
Yeah, and this is where, again, Democrats are falling down on the job. The only guy who seems to be getting it, Bernie Sanders.
Right.
Because it's this kind of stuff that when you throw it out there and you go, hey, MAGA hat guy wearing the Chinese hat made in they're in China. This is what's important. Don't care about the transgender issue. Don't care about the same-sex marriage issue. Don't care about the CRT that you imagine's happening. This is real. This is what's important. At least that's my view, and that's why we're taking.
I think it is. And you say you're a working person. Do you want to pay taxes, and you want everybody else, the uber wealthy, to skip it, so you can pay more for them?
Yep.
I mean, it's logical. This is an issue.
Absolutely, it just is. Yeah. Good job. Can you do one more trumpet? One more trumpet impression?
I did the best in the world. It's great, Rick. You'll love it. You'll love it. It's great. I'm going to keep you around.
All right. I'm glad to be around. Bob, I appreciate the time. As always, great stuff, my friend.
See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, our good friend, the Donald Trump impersonator. Let's take a quick break and wrap things up. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. So some good news coming out of the Department of Labor. And again, this is one of those moments why it's important to have the right people in office. And I've been saying this for a while. It's more than just who's sitting in the Oval Office. It's more than just that guy. It's who they appoint. It's the filter down into all of these different agencies and these different departments and the agenda that they pursue. Now, remember, during the Trump years, they had a person who was in charge of the wage and hour division, the people who go after the people who commit wage theft, who herself was guilty of the wage theft. Now you don't have that. And what you've got is a very aggressive labor department that's going after these people who are stealing from their workforce. And that's why today another big award for workers, this time in Philadelphia. The staffing company evidently cheated their workers out of an enormous amount of money. In fact, the award was some $9.3 million in damages and back pay for 1,756 workers that were misclassified by this staffing company. Because, hey, you're an independent contractor, you're management, we don't have to pay you that overtime. No, we don't have to give you breaks. We don't have to do any of that stuff. You do, yeah. And what you now have is you have a labor department that's going to be cracking down. So employers, a little bit of advice, follow the law. And maybe if we invested a little bit more money into the labor department, gave them some more inspectors, gave them some more folks to make sure that workers don't get cheated, or better yet, and this is where, I'm looking at the size of this award, this fine, this back pay. And I'm going, if these 1,756 employees at this healthcare staffing company that were screwed over, if they were members of a labor union, they wouldn't have gotten cheated. Wouldn't have happened. Because they'd had a grievance procedure, they'd had somebody on the job fighting for them the moment it happened. And I say this all the time. I've never been cheated out of a dime. They've tried. I've had a company try and take 0.1 away from me 6 minutes, and I filed a grievance for it, and I got it. Why? It's the principle. I work for every minute that I'm there, and you have to pay me for that. And we should have that kind of security. But good on the Labor Department for moving this. Now, our folks in Tennessee, my labor folks working and living in Tennessee, you've got a big election coming up. There's an amendment on the ballot, Amendment 1, that would amend your state constitution to make the no rights at work agenda part of your constitution. This is how much taking rights away from workers, the moneyed interests in Tennessee, how much they want the power and control over workers. They're going to want to just inculcate it in their constitution. So never, ever will you be able to undo the horrible. Not like Tennessee is ever going to, just don't ever see them becoming a strong union hold. But they're going to take the moment and make sure, because you never know. Maybe people are going to get fed up. Maybe they're going to spend some time being told how wonderful they were and how they were heroes and how essential they were and how important they were. And then, they're going to rip that away. And those people might go, hey, I kind of feel essential, and I kind of feel like, a frontline hero, and I kind of bought the rhetoric, and I kind of want to make a living, and I kind of want to have health care and, safe working conditions. And how do I get that? And someone in the union may go, hey, here's how you do it. And they might get an idea, and that might happen, which is why the wealthy in Tennessee are going, no, we're not going to let you. Not going to happen. Now, the folks in Illinois, they are working to pass the Workers' Rights Amendment there. On the flip side of Tennessee, Illinois is saying, look, we believe in collective bargaining. We believe in the right of workers to negotiate wages, hours, working conditions. So they're attempting to put an article in the Constitution of Illinois that would guarantee the workers' right to bargain, the Bill of Rights there in the Constitution, and say, look, you have the right to collectively bargain and no freeloading. No freeloading. That seems, to me, it seems sane and rational. And I have people all the time going, well, what if I don't want to join the union? I go, then you can work somewhere else. There's a choice. There's a choice. There's always been that choice. You don't like it, you go across the street, you go somewhere else. That's the choice. You don't get the freeload off the backs of others. And we've really become a society that's convinced people that they can. And this is where I think we're kind of in a moment where we're moving. Come out of my grandparents' generation, they were very much a we generation. They came together, they fought World War II, they came together, they fought on the factory floor to make better opportunities for themselves and their kids. They came together, they joined, fraternal organizations and charitable organizations and churches and all kinds of stuff. They were that kind of we. And then you got the greedy generation. You got the Reagan era, hooray for me, the one who dies with the most toys wins, greed is good. You got those folks. I think we're coming around back to becoming a we civilization again, to where it's more than just the individual, that it's all of us. It's collectively how well we're all going to do, which is why I hearken back to the discussion I had with Rand Wilson and Peter Olney. This idea of raising working conditions for everyone in an industry, so that competition happens on the right things, not like we've seen in the trucking industry and in other industries where it's all cutthroat competition. It's the one who's willing to work for the least wages and break little rules and cut corners and all kinds of things to make ends meet. That's not how we should be allowing things to happen. We should be demanding high road employment with decent wages, hours, conditions. And for me, bargaining is the way to go. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you download the podcast. Never miss an episode. I appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you follow us along on our Working Class Heroes Tour. Looking forward to that. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.